Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is my first audio, podcast, companion to my Substack. This piece was pretty long, so I figured I would just narrate it. And I also had a lot of audio and video clips, so I figured it'd be cooler to just play them within the audio. So just a little bit of background. I started writing this, on the heel of Charlie Kirk's death. And I was like, I'm not going to give this guy any energy. But then, next couple weeks or so, more things began to unfold, and I felt sort of compelled to dig in on this fella and, just kind of make people more aware of who he was, because the way that they tried to reinvent him, it was not cool. And I want people to know just who this person is and just what he stood for. I saw some direct ties between him, his particular hatred for Black women, and the extreme job loss that we saw when federal jobs were cut. So with no further ado, I'm going to just go ahead and begin. The Mythmaker becomes myth. Charlie Kirk and the war on Black women's competence. So Lori Loomer got on the Twitters recently and called one of the sharpest minds in Congress, Representative Jasmine Crockett, a ghetto Black bitch. Recently, one of my kids asked me about the word ghetto, and I had to want to strap in, baby, because I have no short answers when it comes to this word. In my early teaching days, the first time I heard a kid use that word to talk about somebody else, the next day I came in with a full PowerPoint on the history. Because what we were not going to do is throw that word around to disparage each other without understanding what exactly a ghetto is. Ghetto took on a whole new meaning for me somewhere around high school when I learned that ghettos were what the Nazis created for Jews to separate them and put them in the worst environments. I'm going to repeat that. They were created to separate people and put them in the worst environments. Ghettos of this exact same definition exist in America today, but the word has taken on a broader context. Too often, we associate ghetto with something less than, something bootleg, something not quite up to standard. But the reality is the ghetto is the standard. The ghetto is the birthplace of everything America loves and co-opts as its own. Music, dance, language, food. Worldwide, whether you're in Johannesburg, Rio, or Atlanta, the ghetto is where you find the most creative and innovative. But it doesn't change the connotation of the word. This attack from Loomer is just the latest and loudest in an escalating campaign to delegitimize Black women's competence, intelligence, and right to exist in professional spaces. We're going to talk about the absolute myth of the moronic Black woman. Before Trump got elected for a second term, I told people his first term emboldened racists, but if he was reelected, he would enable them. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out now. What started with Charlie Kirk coming for educated Black women has escalated into an all-out attack. So let's address the stereotype of the quote-unquote moronic Black woman. Incompetence is everywhere. There isn't a single people that I haven't met or dealt with an incompetent ass out of that group. Even those groups that are highly regarded for their intelligence, and y'all know who you are, you're in every part of the world, and your titles are usually well-deserved. Even those groups that we call, they're smart. They have some dumbass people in their groups too. But there are different groups of people in which I can attest have a disproportionate number that excel in competence. Black women are one of those groups. The Charlie Kirk comment targeted Black women in customer service. I've noticed that I sometimes have to check my own latent stereotypes about the voice that I hear at the start of a call. And usually by the end, I'm invariably impressed. The Black woman on the other end of the call handles my problems like a champ. The other day, I was at the school board office and there was an issue with my paperwork. My Social Security last name didn't match my ID last name, and the lady didn't know what to do. So she was like, we have to go to Miss such and such's desk. We get to the desk, it's a Black woman. And we come to her desk to sort things out. And it dawned on me, like, in every workplace, almost every workplace, there's a Black woman who knows the system better than everyone else. Everyone else defers to about the protocol and how things are done, and who's been there longer than anyone else, mainly because she hasn't been promoted, because she is so key to the team, and also because, racism. So how is it that we got stuck with this stereotype of Shaniqua with all the attitude behind the counter or the other end of the call? Is this because of prejudice? People writing us off, not knowing who we are or what we're capable of, but based on how we look, dress, or speak? Does internalized racism make people hyperfixate on our mistakes, looking for a way to disqualify our intelligence and disregard us? Because out of 10 encounters, maybe Shaniqua doesn't have to show her super abilities. So 9 times out of 10, you're getting a normal engagement clouded by your own prejudice. Now, have I encountered some less than pleasurable engagements with those same familiar voices? Hell yeah. Collection agencies hire some of our bitterest to do their bidding. Some of these so-called social workers, but really just paper pushers at the welfare office, some of them have to be some of the most miserable witches in existence. And I'm also convinced that sometimes the least competent Black person is put into a role on purpose to be a scapegoat. Herschel Walker. But let's be real. The power structure we have in our nation is definitely never going to just pass along an incompetent doctor or pilot for quote-unquote diversity. And be honest with yourself. There are just as many incompetent white women on the other end of a customer service call that answer everything with,
"Again, I do apologize, but what can I do?"
The rise of Charlie Kirk's voice paralleled a growing anti-Black woman sentiment that I've been noticing increasing in the past several years. A backlash fueled by our advancement and, frankly, by intense and hatred. We saw with podcasters who won't be named, and even Google image results. I have a link here for a good article about the algorithm's bias against Black women. And I'm going to point out when there's good articles for you to go to the reference for. So now there's legislation in Oklahoma to have a Charlie Kirk Memorial Plaza, complete with a statue, erected at every Oklahoma public university. You have people introducing bills to enact holidays to honor this man, and even mint him on a coin. Let's take a minute to think about this now. A podcaster on a U.S. coin. I mean, think about it. For what? What did he represent? One doesn't have to be a statesman to be on a coin, but you should have accomplished something worthy of being minted. What did he actually do or achieve that would warrant this level of commemoration? Did he represent a true quest for understanding or simply confrontation? Was he really a champion of free speech or spreading misinformation rooted in prejudice? And there's a really good video clip here. I'm breaking down a lot of Charlie Kirk's comments over the years. But this isn't new. The instant sanitization of a controversial figure's legacy the moment they die. But with Kirk, it was more than that. What people got was this reinvented, soft-focused, halo-esque imagery being pushed into their timeline. And immediately following this man's death, there was a scramble to mythologize him as this beacon and even martyr of American values. So while all the Kirk worship was going on, people really mourning this man as if he was persecuted and not merely just an unfortunate victim of poor gun laws that he argued were, quote-unquote, worth it, even though at the time of his death, we had reached our 100th school shooting in 2025 alone. Columbine left me forever scarred. I was pregnant with my first child at the time, and I thought, what am I bringing this child into? But I would have never imagined the future. I mean, I never imagined Columbine, but I would have never imagined a future where there would be 100 school shootings per year as a norm. And we weren't even through the year yet, but here we are. And you still have people arguing to keep gun laws status quo. Here's that clip for context.
I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights.
In this same clip, if you watch it, it's on the page. He also advocated for more armed guards in front of schools. What would that actually do? Are they going to be frisking children on the way in because the metal detectors are ineffective? School shootings aren't usually perpetrated by some bad guy coming out of nowhere and getting access to the school. They're usually done by the students themselves. And his answer is armed guards, not counselors, not for students to be armed with empathy and conflict resolution skills, but to be criminalized at the door. Then I was seeing my own people running to his defense, making excuses about his age. Oh, this young man. This is a very grown man with a fully developed brain. And arguing that his words about other people's brains, I play that clip, were taken out of context. Here's what he had to say about Michelle Obama, Ketanji Brown, and some others think Representative Lee.
And Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson were affirmative action picks, we would have been called the racist. But now they're coming out and they're saying it for us. They're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know you do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously.
Yeah, that's what he said. I mean, those are three well-educated women, very bright, very brilliant women, but they don't have, and that's one of those things where they say, oh, it was taken out of context. He didn't say that about all Black women. He just said that about a few. But I'm going to tell you, if you go and look at you go put it in context, go watch the original videos of everything that they say is taken out of context. When you watch it in context, it's usually 2 to 3 times worse what he's talking about and what he's saying. Anyway, so their feed was telling them that, his words were taken out of context, and continued to offer them this reinvented, nearly deified, warmly lit imagery. And I beg, if you don't click any of my links, please take a few minutes to listen to what he actually had to say about Black pilots. And there's a link there, and you want to start around 36 minutes and 46 seconds in and listen to that BS. And then if you can stomach it, continue to watch their racist banter about Black women in college swim requirements. But allow me to emphasize that this little band of idiots on this podcast presented 0 facts to prove their point. Just a bunch of assumptions and hearsay. Their overall argument, which some people will accept as truth because it jives with their prejudice, is that if diversity is forced, standards will be lowered and clutch your pearls, lives will be lost. I mean, literally the title of the podcast was DEI or Die. They also talked about this questionnaire from air traffic control that seemed to attempt to diversify candidates based on their experience. And they tried to make that like it was about race or getting unqualified people. But basically the idea seemed like what they were trying to do was get people with varied backgrounds. So in the case where it said people who enjoyed science less than people who really enjoyed science, they were given more points. And that's because you want to have different perspectives. You want to have different ideas. And what the research has shown is, and there's an article that I've linked here, is that when things do become diversified, safety numbers improve. But I'm not going to go all deeply into that article. You can go check it out yourself. I've linked it a couple times throughout. All right. Now, the problem with air traffic control has nothing to do with DEI, but everything to do with underfunding and understaffing. These people have been crying out that they're working 6-day work weeks, becoming alcoholics to deal with the stress. But they didn't have anything to say about those dangers, those issues. According to Kirk, though, LaQuisha James being in the cockpit is the problem.
I don't want LaQuisha James.
They have that like pilot voice.
And she's just like, hi, ladies and gentlemen. Pray for me.
And the truth is it's just this is the creation that the left wanted.
Because and they think you can't say anything about it because they'll call you a racist. And this is where we really have to take the gloves off and say your name calling will not get in the way of people's safety at 35,000 feet.
They mentioned planes falling out of the sky if DEI continued. And literally, like 2 weeks after that podcast, we had planes falling out of the sky. But as far as we know, not a single one of those pilots was Black or female or handicapped, even though the administration tried to push that narrative with the first crash.
Tragic in the lives of aviation safety was addressed by President Trump before this tragic collision even took place. On his second day in office, the president signed a memorandum to immediately stop Biden DEI hiring programs and return to non-discriminatory, merit-based hiring. And in 2018, during President Trump's first term, the Department of Transportation announced it would put an end at that time to use the bio questionnaire that was introduced by the Obama administration, which punished skilled applicants.
So in that first crash, following that podcast, the administration was already trying to make it about DEI. And like I said, there's no, as far as we know, not one of these pilots were black. So when stereotype masquerades as pattern, Charlie Kirk supposedly stood for a restoration of faith in American values, but in reality, what aligned a lot of people to him were hot topics that they saw in little shorts and reels, namely anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and or anti-black, but more specifically anti-black woman vitriol. But what the algorithm did not feed to some of these people were his ideas around the Great Replacement theory. And there's a link there. Read up on that. Or how vehemently racist members of his organization were. Another link there. Get to know Turning Point and who these people are. Clear examples of the white inferiority complex. And I use that term very deliberately and specifically because it's not about white superiority complex. It is definitely a white inferiority complex. That's why they've named it the Great Replacement theory, because it is a complex, it's a psychological problem rooted in fear. Now, I'm not saying at all that white people are inferior or naturally inferior or anything like that, but many racist white people have a feeling of inferiority. And that's why they are so pressed to maintain their position. Again, I'm getting off topic, so let me get back to the reading. He amplified the idea that moronic black women, and let me just play that clip.
Is if I'm dealing with somebody in customer service who's a moronic black woman, I wonder, is she there because of her excellence or is she there because of affirmative action? It almost creates thought patterns that are not necessarily wholesome. It creates resentment, doesn't it, Heather? This is not a way to design society.
So very clearly, he points out that these kinds of, black women succeeding or being put into roles that he feels are meant for white men or should be reserved for white men or should be attained by white men because they're more qualified, that leads to resentment. That leads to what he describes as, I think the name of his podcast is, something about thought crime, he's almost saying that I don't want to think this way. This is not what I want, but whatever. Anyway. Now, so he amplified this idea that moronic black women were taking jobs from qualified white men and pushed the narrative that black women were stupid, incompetent, incapable. And just like a particular podcaster, I did include his name, but I won't speak his name. How about that? Preaches a deep-seated misogyny, cloaked in self-improvement. Charlie Kirk was full of a very specific disdain for black people that he cloaked in a crusade for his fellow white men. Too many of these right-wing jerks continue to point to black pilots and doctors as undeserving of their roles, somehow allowed to pass through to their positions with less qualifications. And I've got the Elon clip here.
You becoming a doctor, or especially something like a surgeon, if the standards are lowered, probably that the surgeon will make mistake is higher. They're making mistakes in their exam. They may make mistakes with people, and that may result in people dying. What is the evidence? I believe they have literally lowered the standards at Duke University, and that is what the article is referring to. There's no evidence. They have not lowered the standards. There's no evidence about lowering standards. I believe that is a false statement you're making.
What's really interesting to note is that now that's Elon Musk on his take about lowering standards in the medical field, which again, no evidence, zero evidence to support that. And we don't have a disproportionate number of black doctors being sued for malpractice or anything like that. All right, so getting back to what my article says. So never ever presenting a single fact, let alone a pattern of airplane crashes at the hands of black pilots or medical malpractice at the hands of black doctors. Instead, what the record has shown continuously is that the influx of black professionals into white, quote unquote, white jobs actually improves safety stats. And this is where I link the article from, I think her name is Jean Betty. Oh boy, let me find her name. Wonderful, well documented article. She's a pilot herself, and she talks about how, just go check it out. Let me get back to reading. And again, there is no record of a commercial black pilot ever crashing a plane. And I have linked a perplexity search on that. Rob Schneider was wrong and Coulter was wrong. Both took isolated incidents of mechanical or crew failure and tried to blame black pilots. Rob Schneider, yes. Hey, Rob, the Robster, Robberino, the Rob man. Yes, him. He went on Twitter or something talking about some flight and Coulter. But as I said, these were isolated incidents. It was a mechanical failure or crew failure. It was not the pilot's fault. There's absolutely no proof either that standards have ever been lowered in either the aviation field or the medical field. And as a matter of fact, in the aviation field, everyone has to take the exact same tests and meet the exact same thresholds. What kills the most about this administration, this movement, and these pundits is just how mediocre, dumb AF, and just plain illiterate they are. And I'm going to play a few clips of people that are currently in office and just how dumb they are.
So, Secretary, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am.
Suspend their
habeas
right to.
corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President
habeas
Lincoln
corpus, excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea.
Yes, the woman that is the head of Homeland Security does not know what habeas corpus is. She gave her own definition of it. Now, here's another.
Insult the intelligence of the American people. Did he invite himself to the signal thread?
I don't know how he was invited, but clearly he was added.
Clearly it was. Finish your sentence, please.
Clearly he was added to the signal group. Your question is...
You don't know that the president's national security advisor invited him to join the signal thread? Everybody in America knows that. Does the CIA director not know that? Is your testimony that it was appropriate that he was added to this signal thread?
No.
And I think we remember hearing about them having a group chat on Signal about war plans and accidentally inviting a journalist. This last one, this is for the pundits. This is Aiden Ross. Someone called him a fascist, and he's looking up fascist.
It means you are a far right authorization on ultra analyst, political ideology movement characterized by dictator leadership, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition. So I don't know what that means, bro. I swear to God, I don't know.
And the authorization that was authoritarian that he was trying to get to there. This is the level of intelligence of these people that are questioning our intelligence. But anyway, I shall proceed. So at the end of the day, we have these meritless accusations about wanting merit-based hiring. So back to the point. I moved around a bit, presented a lot of information, but let me get back to the original point. And that is that people of influence have influence. Is Charlie Kirk directly responsible for the rising unemployment numbers of Black women? No. But consistently reinforcing stereotypes that we're moronic, we do not have the brain processing power to be taken seriously, and that we would fly a plane with nothing but a prayer, definitely fuels animosity for Black women. Join that with the proponents of the white replacement theory that are not only psychologically adding to the fuel of white fears and around losing ground in this country, but these people are also lobbying, investing, affecting major decisions on what happens in this country. So when it's time to cut someone out, the same group that's envied for their earned trajectory, they're the first to go. So let's talk about the real world cost of manufactured stereotypes. This hateful narrative that moronic Black women are taking jobs from qualified white men is more than just noise. It's a strategically manufactured justification for an economic purge. This is the ultimate real-world cost of Charlie Kirk's rhetoric and the broader anti-DEI movement. The truth is that Black women are not incompetent. They are essential, yet persistently under-promoted pillars of the economy. For decades, public sector employment, federal, state, local governments, has offered Black workers, and Black women in particular, a vital pathway to the middle class. stable jobs, decent hours, better benefits, and more equitable pay than the discrimination-ridden private sector. And here I got a little funny clip. If you remember this, if you know, you know.
Government job. What? The office building on Lake Street. Yeah? He went down to take it over. But they were hiring that day. The brothers walked in with guns. He came out with jobs. The brothers weren't bad anymore. Yes. Why? It's something else.
Now, that's a funny, that's from Mama Get You Sucker, but that is a reality. A lot of people from the 60s and 70s, they might have been on their pro-black thing, but when it came time to having kids and want to start their lives, a lot of them ended up in government jobs. It was stable. It was, like I said, a path to the middle class. So let's talk about this recent purge and the data. So we're seeing a tried and true economic pathway being systematically dismantled. Recent data illustrates that there is a direct and an acute impact of these policies. And I'm talking about the shutdown of a lot of these federal entities. So disproportionate job loss. Black women have been hit hard by cuts in the public sector agencies. According to reporting, nearly 300,000 Black women exited the labor force in just 3 months. And there's a chart here for you to see the comparison of Black women to the U.S. overall. And we see this huge spike. This staggering job loss is tied directly to federal policy shifts, including attacks on DEI initiatives. I don't know how many people I heard or saw online saying that they lost their job and the first thing out of their mouth was, I didn't even know I was a DEI hire. Black women, they make about 12% of federal employees, nearly double the representation in the overall workforce. In the overall workforce, we make up about 6% of the workforce, but in the federal government, we make about 12%. This is an erosion of stability. Black workers, especially Black women, make up a third or more of the staff at key agencies like Department of Education, Treasury, and HUD. When sweeping cuts attack federal jobs and target DEI across the board, the stability of the Black middle class is specifically affected. The narrative is designed to make these job cuts feel like a correction, a removal of quote-unquote undeserving DEI hires like the mythical LaQuisha James. But the reality is that most stable jobs for one of the nation's most educated and competent demographics are being purposefully eliminated. Remember when Trump talked about Black jobs? Government jobs are Black jobs. But Black jobs aren't just found in government work. And we've watched Black journalists being dismissed one by one with no public outcry. The group attacked for its alleged incompetence is, in fact, the group whose stability must be destroyed to satisfy the demands of the white fear-fueled replacement theory. They aren't worried about us failing. They're terrified of us succeeding. When I think of the most competent and capable people I know in this world, the majority of them are Black women. My mother being one of those people. At her job, she is that lady who everyone defers to when they don't know what to do. Always has been. But even in her personal life, she just gets stuff done. Attacks on Black women hurt me deep because I don't just feel them personally. I also feel them for my mother, who I should clarify identifies as mixed, but society still sees as Black, even as light as she is. It infuriates me that because my mom was somebody who actually benefited from a diversity program that enabled her to pursue her dream career. Just as Representative Shirley Jackson Lee pointed out, and Charlie Kirk tried to make fun of her because she tripped up on her words a little bit, but we ain't gonna talk about Caroline Leavitt and how she said biological questionnaire. I was Googling biological questionnaire, thinking that was just something like a mouseketeer. I mean, I thought it was actually there was something to that, but no, she just mispronounces things. She can't even say Democratic Party. She says the Democrat Party. Anyway, she answered a question to a reporter. She said, "Your mom." Yes, this is what we're doing in 2025. The White House spokesperson is answering questions with your mom. Anywho, let's get back to the topic. Shirley Jackson Lee said, "I may have been admitted on affirmative action, both in terms of being a woman and a woman of color, but I can declare that I did not graduate on affirmative action." And this is the truth. This is the case. The door might be open to you, but There's no lesser test or lowered standard or anything like that. Even in my case, when I was in high school, I was a National Achievement Scholar. Not a National Merit Scholar, but a National Achievement Scholar, which did have lower scores to qualify for. And I didn't like it. I was very unhappy with the distinction. I smiled for my photos, but it made me uncomfortable. And I lost friends because of comments that they made. But even in that case, the standards weren't lowered for the National Merit Scholarship. It was a different distinction for a different, you didn't get as much money. You didn't get the same. It was not the same thing. It was something else. So there's never a program where you're going to have lower standards to complete or finish. You're still going to have to go through like everybody else. Anyway, again, I'm off my read here. So I watched my mom bust her butt to get top marks in her training program because I was her study buddy. It's why I know every airport code to this day, and so does she. I recall those days so well because I remember her motivation. I remember her spirit and her confidence. She ended up having to take a job at Palm Springs Airport as a ticket agent, even though we were like a hop, skip, and a jump from Ontario Airport. It took her like 2 hours to get to work across a desert to get to Palm Springs. But she was cool, played her music, sunbathed, feeling good, because every day was putting her closer to her ultimate goal to become a pilot. My mom never actualized those dreams because she got into a car accident and it just kind of changed the trajectory of everything. But I know that if that didn't get derailed, and maybe if she had better support systems at the time, she'd be flying the blue skies right now as a pilot, not as a flight attendant. So when I decided to write this article, it was for her. And it was also for my stepsister, because somehow both of them seem to have felt some sorrow around this polarizing figure. My stepsister, who was raised by my father, my parents are divorced, so his wife's daughter, ironically, also was a direct beneficiary of DEI type initiatives. My father started in construction as a welder before I was born. And shout out to my dad, who recently retired, thank God, after working for like 50 years. Since he was 17 years old, that man worked. His early days when I was a kid were like any entrepreneur. He had highs and lows, good months and bad months, but he was always expanding his skill sets from welding into masonry, all different areas in construction so that he would get more work. And then just after the LA riots, he was able to get put into a supervisory position as a subcontractor for a big company that was contracted to rebuild LA. But they couldn't really bring any white subs at the time without issues, so they asked him to come on as a supervisor. And then after showing how good he was, it enabled him to start getting bigger contracts, and it took his business to a whole different level of stability. My stepsister benefited from that. These contracts were not a matter of him being handed anything. They were the undoing of opportunities that were previously denied. So with both of these women witnessing firsthand how necessary it was for Black people to be afforded more opportunity, how could they mourn a man who attacked our very means to success? Someone who amplified unfounded white fears, stereotype, and prejudice. This article was very, very difficult for me to write. Not because of all the fact-finding or research, but because of the emotional component. As a smart little Black girl who grew up to be an even smarter Black woman, my intelligence has constantly been challenged and undermined. So this brought up a whole lot of feelings for me. Anger. Sitting through that podcast with them 4 idiots infuriated me to the point that I had to go to the gym because I was that pissed off. I had to run. I had to play racquetball with myself and slam the ball and run around and get that shit out of my system. I was frustrated. I was crying angry tears as I wrote these words because I know far too many highly capable Black women who doubt themselves and they're not living up to their potential because they struggle with imposter syndrome, because people put into our heads constantly that we are not worthy. I'm getting a little emotional right now. I was hurt. I felt physical pain in my chest as my quote unquote feed offered me videos of little Black girls breaking the barriers to integrate schools, and realizing that 50 years later, we've risen as the most educated class in the country, but we're still being virtually spit on. Please follow along for hopefully less long installments, but I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you do come to the written part and check out some of the references and sources, the article by the pilot debunking all of that about, lower standards for pilots. That is Captain Jeannie Beatty, and you can find her on LinkedIn. She's got a whole website. But yeah, these are some really good reads. I hope you have a great day. Thank you again for joining me.